all got my screen?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Right. Right. Well, welcome to Rainow, and thanks for all for tuning in. Most of you have got microphones muted. If anybody does want to ask a question, please unmute your microphone and ask the question. I'm happy to take questions as we go through. So don't feel you need to wait till the end. We've all been subject to various restrictions and lockdowns in different countries at different times, thanks to this awful pandemic that we're suffering. In the UK, we've been lucky in that throughout the lockdowns, we've been allowed to leave our houses for the purpose of exercise. Sometimes that's been more relaxed than others. At times it's exercise in your local area. So for me, living where I do in the village of Rainow, surrounded by hills on all sides, it meant going for walks from the house. So back in December, I decided to set myself a little project, and that was to take photographs on my walks from the house. And I went out every day right through the winter for walks. Many of the days the weather was really too foul to take anything of a picture whatsoever. But the photographs that I've taken over a 10-week period, starting at the beginning of December through to the middle of February, is what you're going to see today. In fact, all but 3 of the pictures were taken over just 7 weeks, from Christmas time through till middle of February. Rainow, the village of Rainow is situated on the western edge of the Peak District National Park. And for those of you that are not too familiar with the United Kingdom, a little map at the top shows you where the Peak District National Park is located. It sits largely at the southern end of the Pennine chain of hills that runs up the north of England and between the cities of Manchester in the west and Sheffield in the east. The Peak District itself is divided into 2 geological areas. The north and the west are known as the Dark Peak, and that's hilly, upland, gritstone and sandstone geology. The southeastern part of the Peak District is known as the White Peak, and that's because the stone there is predominantly limestone. And it's basically a plateauish area cut by deep gorges and river valleys. Now, Rainow is situated on the very extreme west of the Peak District. I hope you can see my cursor. So this is the area here that is the feature of today's presentation. The Peak District itself, the national park, it's the oldest national park in Britain, the very first to be designated. The village itself is surrounded by hills, and what I've done here is I've just created a little plot of where I've taken the pictures, and as you can see, there's footpaths in all directions, and as a result, I've taken photographs, these are the blue dots, in every direction surrounding the village. With all those paths, the question on any morning when I was setting out from the house was, well, which way do I go today? It was always a challenge. Trying to pick a way that was different to the way you went on a previous day. I One of the challenges I had for this presentation was how to actually organise the images. Do I do it geographically or theme or what? And I just ended up, well, I'll show them chronologically. I'll present them in the order that I took them. So that's what we're getting. The first snow of the winter came on the 4th of December. And we were in the cloud the whole day, so there was no real photographic opportunity. But by evening, just as the snow was melting somewhat, the cloud lifted up, so I went out and I tried my hand at light painting. Now, light painting is where you put the camera on a tripod and you take a number of separate exposures. You take one exposure showing the ambient lighting and ambient background, and then you take a number of other exposures and use a torch to selectively illuminate parts of the image. And then you put the separate images back together to make a single image back in Photoshop. This is one that you might have seen, because I use this one as a Christmas greeting card. I quite like those little conifers at the front with a bit of snow on them. The war memorial in the village was the next thing I turned my hand to with light painting. And because there was quite a bit of light, artificial light coming from houses behind, you've got quite an illuminated orange sky bouncing back off the clouds. Now, going on to almost Christmas time, and this point I got quite lazy in that this photograph was taken out of the window at the side of me. So this is the upstairs window looking out of the back of the house, taken with a telephoto lens. I quite liked the warm light on this, but what really made it for me was that line of sheep. So I think without that line of sheep, there isn't much of a photograph here, but for me, they added something to it. The following morning, being lazy again, I got a nice sunrise. The sun was catching the low cloud as it broke up, but this was taken from the other side of the house. This was taken from outside and looking across the main road that we're on to the hillside opposite. I just liked the detail that you got in the dawn-lit sky. You will see this tree again a couple of times later this morning. Christmas Eve, I got up a lot earlier. I was up very early on Christmas Eve, and I noticed there was some cirrus, high cloud in the sky, and it was all black. So I set off on a much longer walk, put the head torch on. It was -6 degrees, but there was no real wind, so it didn't feel too bad. And I went to this location, which I've never photographed before. There's not many of those. I didn't think there were any of those to be had in walking distance from home, but I managed to find one. And I was treated to this lovely salmon pink dawn sky.
Why are you carrying a tripod at this time, Trevor?
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, my tripod here, I've got two tripods. I've got a travel tripod that's carbon fibre and quite lightweight. It's not the sturdiest of things. I took that with me on all the walks, and that's what I've used for all my pictures, bar a few. The previous one that you saw of the sunrise with the tree, I took from outside of the house. That was taken on my big heavy Manfrotto tripod, and a couple of the other ones I have lugged the heavy one along for night photography. I quite like this clump of trees. It's a lovely spread to it. And I took this very much thinking black and white minimalism. But this is colour, and I do prefer it in colour. It didn't make the cut for black and white for last month's challenge, but I do like the attractiveness of the clump. I went on back to the location that I found on Christmas Day. As you can see, it's a very heavy weather at this point, lack of light. For me, it's not as good a picture as the dawn one, but it's got its own merits in its own way for me. I'm still pleased with it. But many of the days that I went out and I had either cloud like this or cloud below my feet. There was very little light to be had through most of the period. In fact, Rainow has pretty awful weather during most of the year, and the annual sunshine average statistics for Rainow for December is an average of 30 minutes sunshine per day, so you don't get much of it. Fortunately, that cloud broke up at the end of the day. And this one was taken with my bigger tripod. It's two photographs, or two exposures. It's the one shot, because exposing for the foreground, because this is after the sun had gone down and you got that lovely lilac magenta light after sunset. The moon was overexposed, so I had to take a less exposure shot to show the detail in the moon and put the two back together again. But after sunset, you can get some gorgeous magenta light, and it's picked up especially so when you've got some snow. Another day, this one is New Year's Eve, another black, cloudy day, but fortunately, a little hole of sunshine. So yet again, a shot of some trees with the sunshine hitting them. Carrying on my walk, looking for images, and a lot of the time I'm spending trying to search out images because I didn't want to take any photographs that I'd taken previously. I wanted to do new material. I came across this tree and I thought, another one for minimalism black and white. But this does not work in black and white. In colour, you've got this lovely contrast between the dead vegetation warm tones and the tree. If you put this to black and white, the vegetation just looks a little bit messy, whereas it doesn't look so messy in colour. But I did a couple of tricks on this. Rob mentioned last week, and a few others have done previously, about the merits of flipping an image left to right. This photograph has been flipped left to right, and is far stronger looking this way, as we read in the West from left to right. So you're led in by the vegetation to the end point, which is on the thirds. The second bit of trickery that I did is because this is a fairly windy location. There's a lot more growth on the right-hand side of the tree than the left. I don't know if any of you make use of the warp tool in Photoshop, but I used it on this. If you use the warp tool, select a marquee, a rectangle, larger than the area you actually want to warp. Do not move the outer edges of the warp. Move the central area. And what you can do, therefore, is shorten and distort the image inside. And I used it to shorten some of the branches on the right-hand side and make the appearance of the tree more balanced. So if you haven't used the warp tool, have a play with it. I find it very useful for minor image tweaks. The millstone is the emblem of the Peak District National Park, and as you enter the park, you often find these millstones marking the Peak Park boundary. So I went out on this night and had another go at a bit more light painting. Basically, you put several images using a torch to light different elements within that and then putting them back together. One of the things that I've tried to do over the summer and set myself as a bit of a project on a longer term is to do a project and then photo book of panoramas of the Peak District. So I've started looking more in panorama format for images as well as conventional format. This hill is Big Low, and this is a panorama that I took by taking two images in quick succession of the left half and the right half, and then stitching them back together in Photoshop. And there's different ways that you can do panoramas, and you'll find that I've used various techniques during the images I've been taking for this presentation. I particularly like the warm light on this early on. A bit later on, you'll have another panorama, same day, and this was taking a different technique. I've looked down on people with some disdain who use mobile phones for photography. Well, I took this on my mobile phone. I set the phone to panorama mode and then scan from left to right, and the camera or the phone then stitches the images together automatically and gives you the panorama shot. This is taken with a Samsung Galaxy S9, so it's not one of the latest generation of cameras that are capable of even better things. But what I end up with typically is something like an 18 megabyte JPEG file. And because the camera on the phone is wide angle, you get slightly different distortions and corrections to that distortion, give you a slightly different image than you would do if you take this and stitch it together. So I tend to use both techniques, the standard camera and the mobile phone, and then decide which one I like the best for a particular image. But in terms of resolution, I'll just zoom into this. I don't know how this shows through via Zoom, but you can see there is pretty good resolution. So I'm actually quite impressed with what you can achieve with a mobile phone. And I've got to eat my own words.
Is it handheld with the mobile?
Yes, handheld. Handheld and rotated the camera. The trick is to keep, whilst you're rotating the camera, set the camera to panorama mode, and it's like doing a movie, a video. You rotate the camera from left to right, or right to left, whichever way you wish to do it, pressing a start and stop to record, and then a few seconds later, when it's done its stitching together, it will display the panorama image. The real trick is to keep the camera in the same place whilst you're rotating it. Otherwise, you can get some bad artifacts as it tries to stitch together and compensate for moving the camera around. This one is yet another panorama of the Dane Valley. I'll just go back to the previous one because there's something I want to point out in there. This hill in the background is Kerridge Hill, Kerridge Ridge, and that's something you'll see more pictures of later. Going back to this one, this is where, for me, panorama really works. Because as a panorama image, as a scene, I think this is quite a nice photograph. But if you actually look at the photograph in detail and try to crop into what would be a normal format image, I don't see a single photograph in there. But the whole makes an image. And this one was taken by 3 separate images, overlapping images, and then all 3 stitched together back again in Photoshop. If you're doing this technique, you need to have an area which overlaps between the images so that the photo merge, which is automatic in Photoshop, can easily stitch them back together. It's very easy to do. Now, this is a location you're going to see quite a lot of. This is the top of a hill called Yearns Low, and there's a cairn on the top, but Yearns Low also has around a 4,000-year-old round barrow, which is an ancient burial chamber. It was reused by the Romans, and Roman remains have been found here, as well as Bronze Age artifacts. But I loved the sky that we got this morning. I've been going up here most mornings and seeing absolutely nothing. On this occasion, I got a little bit of nice mackerel sky. So the previous one was taken with my camera. This one is taken with the mobile phone. I was a bit upset when I saw that the farmer had been out and driven all around, spoiling the snow with his tractor. But then again, I thought, maybe there's a photograph in here. So this one, I thought I'd try and make use of those tractor tracks and make it a key element of the image. So this was taken again with the mobile phone panorama format. And for me, they actually do add to the image. I did love the sky that we got that day, but it was a challenge again to find subjects. I came across these 4 rocks, and a group of 4 is never good. But by arranging them so you've got 1 big one and 3 small ones, I felt that I overcame the limitation of even numbers in an image. Got down on my knees in the snow, used the mobile phone, and by scanning left to right, that's the image that I got. And it does tend to emphasize the center features of the image by correcting for the distortions in the camera phone. So it made those rocks look a little bit bigger and a little more prominent. The following morning, there was a little bit of a hole at dawn, and this was my first ever photograph, I think, with focus stacking. So it's 2 images taken in succession, one where you focus on the background and one where you focus on these rocks. And unfortunately, I didn't do as well a job as I would have liked on the rocks because they are not pin sharp. I should have used differential focusing. I ended up focusing on the rocks here rather than focusing on the hyperfocal distance, which should have been here, because this first rock in the bottom right isn't sharp as I would have liked. That is Lamelode Reservoir in the background. But one thing I did do is try to find different photographs in the same location, constantly searching for something different, put the telephoto on and shoot the sun through the clouds over the misty moors. Now, this is one exception to my try not to photograph things I've photographed before, but I thought I'd try and do it a little bit better, and I think it is a bit better than my previous attempt. This is something that I do on the walk up to Yernslow, a couple of trees up that lane. A previous picture you saw looking down from this point. Although it's close to black and white, this again is colour. You can see the hint of colour in the trees on the right-hand side. But what I liked about this was because the direction of the snowfall had come from an unusual side, it came from the west rather than usual coming from the east. It had picked out these Gothic arches on the dam, and I thought that made quite a nice feature. Now this is looking back. They're the trees that you saw in the earlier picture. This is looking back to Kerridge Ridge at dawn, and this was a lovely day. We got that early morning band of earth shadow creating that nice magenta, lilac-y, salmon tones in the sky. So you've got this bit here, which is the full shadow and the blue, and then this is gradual change of light as it's refracted through the Earth's atmosphere. But it was all fog. It was fog when I left down in the valley. Rainow is down in the valley in the fog at the bottom here. We climbed up out of the fog, and the little white dot here, you will see this again. That's a monument on the top of Kerridge Ridge, which will come up later. But this is Yernslow Summit. Those of you who remember photograph that I put in to one of the recent challenges of the snow and a building with the mast, that's in the background here is the same mast. But that lies beyond the parish of Rainow, and all the pictures that I'm showing today are all within the parish of Rainow. I decided to make that my boundary. But the cloud cleared a bit from overhead as the sun got higher, and it's the same location, or close to the same location, and you can see a totally different feel to it for just a matter of 15 minutes, 20 minutes difference in time. But I was in for a real treat, because the morning light that came up when the sun got above that cloud was absolutely beautiful. And some foggy low cloud just started to form at the same time. And it was an absolutely wonderful feeling to be out there at this particular point in time. But that cloud that you could just see starting to form, that came from nothing in about 1 minute. About 3 minutes later, the entire sky was covered. It just created out of nothing. It's the same place, and a totally different feel to the image. So change lenses, And it's a totally different picture again. This time with my shooting about 250 millimeters or 200 millimeters, which it might be less. Oh no, it is a lot less. I beg your pardon, 64 millimeters. So it's on an APS sensor. So this is something like 90 to 100 millimeter telephoto lens. Going then for about a week with nothing but poor weather, no chance of any real photographs, but still getting out every day with the camera, but not producing anything. We had a gorgeous sunny start and a perfectly still day. So I went in the other direction. I went up Kerridge Ridge. And this is looking south from Kerridge Ridge. To the right is the Cheshire Plain. To the left is the Peak District. And so often when you're out, there's more than one image in a scene. Change lenses, you can get more than one photograph. And this is the Ordnance Survey triangulation column on the summit of Kerridge Ridge. Rainow is off to the right. The Cheshire Plain is off to the left. In the far distance on the left would be Manchester. I did this with a mobile phone. My first instinct, well, the first thing to do is to get down on your knees again to make the OS column break the horizon. My first instinct was to make the OS column right in the center of the image. But when I looked at that, it didn't look good. So by putting it slightly offset and putting the length of the ridge so you can see past it along the ridge, it just seemed to make a much better image than a dead center composition. Now this is the monument you saw on an earlier photograph at the far end of Kerridge Ridge. And the Rainow parish boundary goes through the middle of this monument. And you can see down here a mill. You'll see a photograph of that in a moment. This monument is known locally as the White Nancy, and it was erected to commemorate the Duke of Wellington's victory at Waterloo. Now, that's the mill. I just like the way that the mist was breaking over it and the warm light coming through and hitting the mill. It's a lovely building. It was originally a cotton mill. Now it's residential and coffee shop and the like, and some offices as well. This is the modern equivalent of a mill. I have posted this on Facebook. This is the AstraZeneca pharmaceutical manufacturing facility just outside Macclesfield. And you look down on this from the Kerridge Ridge. I just liked, even though it's an ugly modern structure, it had its own beauty in the lighting and mist that we had that morning. Moving on another week, I've been many a time I set out in the morning with head torch, hand torch as well sometimes, and plenty of warm winter clothing. This morning again was -6 degrees. And that is another photo of Biglow with the lights of Salford in the distance. Manchester and Salford in the distance. A bit later on, as the sun starts to catch some of the distant clouds, he didn't actually rise on me this particular morning. You can just about make out the buildings of Manchester on the right and Salford on the left. Manchester's about 35 kilometres away. But again, trying to find different angles on Yerns Low, different moods, different feels to the images. And working hard to find different images. So this time it was a case of, excuse me, my mouse just fell off my table. Working hard to try and find different images, looking for something to put in the foreground. Again, lacking light, but I liked the tracing that the wind-blown snow had created in these walls and on the cairn. Again, trying to find something to, excuse me, trying to find something for a subject. So getting down again on my knees, looking at the little clumps and the textures in the snow. But I set off for a walk going on past the reservoir that you've seen in previous imagery. And this is now looking back across to a place called Wagonshaw Brow. And I just liked the way all the fences in this trace out a pattern. So it leads you through the picture. This again is a mobile phone. I have no idea why this post is here, but I thought it was interesting enough to use as a subject in the scene. The previous image was this area over here. On my walk, I came across
Did you
a
process?
little flock of Emilio?
Sorry, did you process your mobile pics on Facebook, on Photoshop or Lightroom?
Yes, I put them into Photoshop and I make small adjustments to them. Yes, it's going back to that one. So I might make some minor adjustments as necessary. If there's anything that needed cloning out, which there wasn't on this image, there isn't on most of them. I might give a little bit more contrast to the sky. Make sure my white point and black point are where I want them. May just tweak the color balance a little bit. So those sorts of things.
But you don't do it on the mobile.
The panorama is done by the mobile phone.
No,
so there's
sorry,
there's no stitching in Photoshop.
No, sorry. It's just if you process it on the mobile or on your PC.
Yeah. The processing it creates a JPEG, so there is some automatic processing done in translating its image to a JPEG. I then process it a bit further on the PC.
Okay, thanks.
I came across this a flock of sheep on my walk, and they looked pretty cold. And I like this one with the snow on its head. And I will say now that I did not throw a snowball at the sheep. I took quite a few of these. This one I thought was nicely framed between two backsides of other sheep. And I just quite like the colours, of traffic light colours of dye on the backs of the sheep. It was making a nice foil for the face of this one. Now, looking at this, there is absolutely no colour whatsoever in the background. And I have not desaturated it. This is a straight shot, and there really is no colour in the background. It really is black and white. Straight image, nothing done to it other than actually boosting the saturation and the contrast a little. Another day, another walk up to Yerns Low. I think it's one of the nicest summits around. Again, taken on the mobile phone. And again, this was taken on the camera. I don't know whether or not it shows clearly enough on your screen via Zoom, but this little white dot on the right-hand side here is the Jodrell Bank Radio Telescope, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, where I spent 5 years of my life. I've done very few black and white images. I was expecting some of them to be better in black and white, and they haven't been. This one, however, is better in black and white for me. I was just a little bit too slow. I saw the rider coming over the brow of the hill and got the camera out. By the time I got the camera out and switched it on, the rider unfortunately had moved a bit further forward. But nevertheless, still for me in a nice position in the frame. That's the colour shot, and for me the black and white is better. On this particular day, it started off okay. I went out and it started snowing, but I thought, what the hell? Carry on taking pictures. I've got a photographer friend who lives in Snowdonia in North Wales, and her motto is, you either learn to take photographs in the rain or you don't take photographs. So I thought, well, I better start taking photographs in the snow. And I just saw this huddle of sheep in the snow, and I thought this image just summed up weather. So if you have a weather challenge later on, you might see this one again. The parish church in Rainow is actually quite difficult to photograph. There's very few angles on it, and you can't get any photograph showing the whole church just because of the surrounding trees and the hilly nature of the landscape. But I managed to find this angle, and I really liked the way the snow was just picking out all the twigs and branches. So I opened up the shadows a bit in this image to get a bit more detail in the stonework. Easy to do in Lightroom or Photoshop. This is a general view of the main road through the village. Excuse me. Rainow Church. And I live just off here to the left up here. This is actually taken from the Gritstone Trail long distance path, which runs through the village. And this is on the Gritstone Trail as it climbs out of the village. And I really liked this iron gate. I wanted to make a picture here. And so again, went to mobile phone for the panorama. And that sort of what the distortions that you get with that widen the entrance to the gate. They emphasize the middle of the image. So being sensible in this location, wanting to photograph the tree, I did the distant photographs first. And it's the same with all these images. Start taking your distant photographs first and walk in. Otherwise, you end up photographing your own footprints. But this is one that I took and thought about the challenge for black and white minimalism. And the beauty with this one is, in the background to this is Kerridge Ridge, cutting right through the middle of that tree. But because we had hill fog, you can only see the bottom of Kerridge Ridge here. So it isolated the tree and made it a far more powerful image than it would have been without the hill fog. I said you would see that tree again, and this one is one that almost made my cut for the minimalism challenge. This is the tree that is across from our house. And I just liked the tracing of the dry stone wall and the branches in the snow. Walk a few meters up the road and you can take another picture across the road. I liked the way the clouds made a foil for this tree, almost like a halo above it. And here I was in two minds. The dry stone wall across the bottom of the image gives a nice, firm, solid base to it. But it's got a bit more contrast than the tree. So do I keep it? Do I crop it off? Not sure. That's with it cropped off. For me, I think I prefer it with the wall there, even though it is a greater contrast than this subject tree. You may disagree. So after taking those photos, I went for a walk across. This is the first tree that you saw rather than the second tree. There was a flock of sheep around. So, and I basically walked around from side to side, trying to find a composition with the sheep and the tree that I found pleasing. And this was the best one that I managed. This is the second tree that you saw. This was done as a single image, cropping off the top and cropping off the bottom, rather than my usual technique of taking two images and stitching them together. The problem with that is you end up stretching the image perhaps sometimes beyond its merits. And this one isn't absolutely bitingly sharp, which I think I would have got if I'd have taken two separate images and stitched them back together. Oops, sorry, I've hit the wrong thing. Apologies. I will restore that. I just clicked the wrong thing. I do apologize. I'll bring this back as soon as I possibly can. Please bear with me. There we go. Have you got me on screen share? Have you got this on? Is this on screen share?
No.
Could you grant me screen share, please? I'm almost there. There we go. You should be having it now.
Yeah.
Apologies for that mess up on my part. Right.
Don't worry.
Hopefully we're all back with the imagery.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good now.
Right. This one is another shot down onto Bigelow, which is one of the early hills that you saw with the lights of Manchester in the background. As you can see from the lights of Manchester, it's still a nighttime shot with the first light of dawn beginning to show to get a little bit of detail. So this is on the tripod and a fairly lengthy exposure. But I quite like the colour that it's picked up in these trees on the left-hand side. The 24th of January was a very interesting day. We have a saying in Britain, red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. And this was in the morning. And it was a gorgeous pink sunrise. But this particular morning, here's yours truly. I really needed my winter clothing because just after those photographs, the wind picked up. So it's about -5, -6, and it now is blowing a gale. So I took a few shots of the snow blasting past the cairn and tumulus at Yern's Low, and then I ran for home. Much quieter on the other side of the hill on the descent. I spotted this barbed wire, and I thought, minimalism in monochrome again. But it doesn't work in monochrome at all. There is a contrast between the reddy brown tones of the stone and the steely blue tones of the sky. And that works. Because if you convert this to monochrome, you've got to have the sky light enough for the barbed wire, and you've got to have the snow, it's got to be dark enough to show the snow, and it just looks a little flat. Whereas in colour, for me, it works a lot better. This is a tree I've photographed many times. So my challenge for this time was to find an angle on it, which I hadn't photographed before. And what I decided to do was to use this old stone stile in the foreground as a foil for that tree. And this is along here is an old stone flagged path between the villages of Rainow and Bollington. It's over 200 years old for basically the mill workers to walk from one village to the other. But I quite like the fact this had got some leaves left on it, despite this being the end of January, and able to pick up a little bit of colour against the steely blue sky. This was a case of patience. I saw this photograph. Unfortunately, the horse was in the wrong place. But I waited about half an hour, and finally, after waiting that length of time, the horse finally moved to where I wanted it, and I was able to take the photograph. And as soon as I'd taken the photograph, as though it was playing games with me, the horse comes across and says hello. And it's not just people portraits that can look good over the shoulder. You can make animal portraits look good with an over the shoulder type photograph as well, rather than just going straight face on. Well, this tree was a challenge for me. I like dead trees, they're not nice shape, nice structure. But there was no access to this particular point. It was fenced off on the left and fenced off on the right. So I used the live view screen and tilted the live view so I could see it, and then leant over the fence on the left, holding the camera at arm's length, looking at the live view and pressing the shutter from a distance. And this is what I got. Now this one works for me both in colour and black and white, and for me they're quite different pictures because I like the sky and the gentle tones of the sky in this one, whereas when I go to black and white, I've brought out the texture of the sky. And for me, it's a completely different feel of the image, even though it is actually the same shot. This was a morning, yet again, where we'd got hill fog. So I went down along the Dean Valley to keep below the hill fog. This was one that I took thinking, again, the minimalism challenge, contrasting the tree out of the fog with the line of trees in the fog, but it didn't really do too much for me. But what I did notice when I was taking this photograph, and what I liked about this photograph, was a bit of blue sky, giving a bit of colour and tonality to it. And you can just see a little bit of light starting to break through. And I like the contrast of the red brick of this old pump house with the blue in the upper left. I thought that was a nice foil. But noticing that light starting to break through and the hill behind me still in cloud, I thought it could be interesting up there when the sun breaks through, if it does. So I raced up the hill as fast as I possibly could and got there just in time. And this is probably my favourite image that I've got from the whole of the 7 or 10 week period. There are 2 dead trees up here, and that was my target. The sun was where the sun was, but I just love the contrast of the warming tones in the cloud, and you can see some refraction colours in the cloud with this blue and icy chill of the snow. The colours in this have not been altered. Whilst I was there, the farmer had come up with a truck and brought some feed for the sheep. And of course, the sheep come running out of the fog. And I thought that line of sheep made quite a nice image. And another clump of sheep through another hole. Walking on from there, this is another panorama shot. I quite like it. It's a pattern of walls and trees and fields. And that rarity, blue sky. And here I went again for panorama, and this is actually a cropped panorama taken with my telephoto lens, which is extraordinarily sharp as a lens, so you can just cut the top off and cut the bottom off. And I just quite like these 3 clumps of trees at the bottom and the lovely rolling shapes which are echoed in the hill beyond, with the farm building right on the top, on the thirds. The same farm as we saw earlier, but this time with a bit of sunlight on it. This is another one that I really wanted to do this in colour, and I have done it in colour. You'll see that next. But for me, I think I prefer the black and white to the colour. that is the colour. For me, as I said, I prefer the black and white. It's a case of when you go out with the camera, just keep looking, just see what might make a photograph. These are just 2 stone gateposts. But by getting down on my knees again, getting low and making a panorama photograph out of them, you actually get a photograph. So you don't need something astounding to take the photograph. It's just a case of looking and thinking. Unfortunately with this one, the snow was beginning to melt and it had dropped mostly off the tree. I'd been to this location a week earlier and I'd got the tree covered in snow and I did exactly this picture, but there was no light on it. So when I finally got there with light on it, there's no snow on it. So you can't have both. Again, this was done mobile phone. As was this one. Again, very little subject. But by getting down and using the wall to lead you in and the high panorama format, it actually makes an image. Now this time, this was mobile phone, and yes, I had to do a good bit of work in Photoshop because there was an ugly post sticking up out behind this piece of old farm machinery. So I got rid of the post in Photoshop. As well as going up to Yernslow in the early morning or for the dawn, I also went up there at times for sunset. And this is a sunset picture. And as you can see, with sunset over here and sunrise over here, in December, January, the sun doesn't stay up above the horizon for all that long and doesn't get very high. This is looking out to Cheshire Plain, out in the direction of Macclesfield. And I just liked the pattern of these stone walls and that single tree. This was the Nearly shot. I just loved the sunburst and the shafts of light coming down. Unfortunately, those shafts of light fell behind the hill that you can see in the image. It would have been wonderful had it actually struck that hillside. But unfortunately, you can't create your own weather. Another dawn on Yernslow. At this point, this is New Year's Eve. I beg your pardon, it's not New Year's, I beg your pardon. This is 31st of January, end of January. A very intense red sky with some frost on the ground. The frost was nice. I tried to make a different picture with the frost. As you can see, a lot of the snow had gone. Indeed, you could hardly see any snow in that photograph. The following day, we were treated to sunshine again. And in the background here is the village of Rainow. And this is the Ordnance Survey column back on Kerridge Ridge. looking the opposite direction, looking into the Peak District. This is looking the opposite way. What I liked about this one is this cloud. So it makes a convergence along the ridge with the footpath that goes along the ridge. And I quite like that. The following day, we were treated to something that I'd never seen before, which is freezing rain. I saw lots of smashed ice below this tree, and then I looked up to see the tree just covered in ice. This is where the surface is a lot colder than the freezing point, and when the rain hits it, it instantly freezes. I took quite a few images, and this is the one that I thought was the most pleasing. Another dawn on Rainow with a little bit of mist in the background. But again, the snow returned, and it was a case of trying to work an image. And here all we've got is nothing more than a few grass clumps. Looking around, trying to see a photograph and making the best of what is there. Rainow with snow drifts with the wind blown in front of it. But wind-blown snow, this was quite cold. It was blowing somewhat of a gale. But the nice thing about wind-blown snow is you get snow drifts and snow sculptures. I have done all of these in black and white as well. And I quite like the blue tones. What I liked about this one, as well as the nice S shape in it, I liked the way that it was echoed with the out of focus dunes in the background, the softer dunes. Now you did see a crop of this in the minimalism challenge, done as black and white, and that is printing it or processing it as a low-key image, just focusing very much on the highlights. So you have seen that in last month's challenge. Even though we're in the Peak District and surrounded by hills, it's only 3 miles or 5 kilometres to the Cheshire market town of Macclesfield. And this is an old milepost. And I just like the way it was nestled into this corner next to the dry stone wall with the snow on it. And that was on my way up to see about a sunset. And I got a little bit of nice light on the sunset. The sun eventually drifted into that cloud and it was all gone. But this time I tried a few shots. And the following day, I went back onto Kerridge Ridge in the afternoon, and the sun just started to break through this cloud. It created a really stormy-looking sky, very moody. So different to the previous images that you've seen of this triangulation column. Same location, but totally different feel. Icicles. This is next to a very large waterfall that we have in Rainow, but the large waterfall isn't that photogenic itself in the snow. There's a lot of black, a lot of white, and it doesn't lend itself to an artistic picture. So I zoomed in on a little side tributary to the waterfall where I found these icicles, and I thought that made a pleasant shot. Following day, back to Yerns Low, and this time in the evening light, catching Yerns Low, and in the background, Shining Tor. So you can get the same image, same location. This looks very wild and desolate and bleak moorland. On another photograph, it can almost look semi-hospitable. But the nice evening light was great on the snow dunes, picking out in lovely golden pink colours the drifts. Following day, another icicle. Put it on the thirds, use the flow of water to lead towards its composition. Maybe better if I'd actually flipped this one left to right. Coming towards the end of our 10 weeks, sunset and a lovely mackerel coloured sky. The previous one was taken with the fixed camera. This one was taken with the mobile phone in panorama mode. And you can see a slight difference in terms of how the mobile phone introduces a slight distortion to the imagery to correct for its wide angle lens. Yerns Low. And the wind started to blow again. And got stronger. "13th of February, I was treated to yet another nice sunrise. But the final image that I took in that sequence was a night shot from the ascent up Yerns Low early on. You get a view up the road as it climbs up over the top, and with a telephoto lens I waited for the car trails. I had to wait over half an hour to actually get the trails as I wanted them and the level of the background light. Because in lockdown, there's not much traffic on the road. This was taken around about 5 o'clock. So you were getting people that were working coming back and forth. So there was a little bit of traffic, just enough to make the image. And the final photograph, this one really sort of says winter is over or coming to an end. And this is a panorama. This one is taken as stitched from 3 separate images. And if you remember where that single post was, that Emilio asked his question earlier, this is taken from just near that post, looking down onto the reservoir. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Some
Yeah.
beautiful imagery there.